Welcome to Noon Hour Slides from the Moose Jaw Museum and Art Gallery. We're located on Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Blackfoot, Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We pay our respects to First Nations and Métis ancestors and reaffirm our relationship with one another. We gratefully acknowledge funding from the City of Moose Jaw, Sask Arts, Sask Culture, Saskatchewan Lotteries, Canada Council for the Arts, Canadian Heritage, and the Government of Canada. I'm Vincent Houghtaling, the Administrative Assistant here, and I'm here to welcome you to today's presentation. And I will be presenting today, talking about my trip to Iceland. Welcome. And so in May of this year, I went to Iceland, and I'd never been out anywhere outside of Canada and the US before. And so it seemed like the thing to do. Surely the logical thing to do for one's first major trip abroad is to commit to a 2-week solo road trip around an entire country. And so my journey began, as all journeys do, by going to Toronto first. And I was too chicken to leave the airport, so I had about 10 hours to kill in Terminal 3 at Pearson. Looked at everything they had, ate a couple times, took in a Zoom meeting, and as you see here, I tried to collect as many different plane liveries as I could find. And eventually the time came, and there was my plane. So I had all my stuff in my backpack, ordered Thingvellir, and grabbed my standard issue Iceland Air blanket for the attempted sleep ahead. Look, the text is in Icelandic. I'm on the way. I watched some of their tourism videos and the in-flight entertainment. Drank my first Appelsien of many, just like local orange pop kind of stuff. Is good. Does when possible. So maybe someday we'll have live flat economy seats, but not now. Landed, got in a long line of customs, looked longingly at the EU customs line where they just kind of walked through. Kept waiting. Was baffled as to why the UK would choose this. Kept walking. Missed the shop that sold the thing I needed and left the airport. Okay, one more plane. I walked over to the rental car place and got my vehicle, Suzuki Vitara. Those who saw my Seattle presentation will notice the through line here. The Longest Johns, who I was going to see on my Seattle trip, did an ad campaign in Australia singing about this vehicle. I drove into the town of Keflavik itself on instinct and signage, internally screaming about roundabouts. And the thing I didn't have yet was a SIM card for my phone. So I had to bum around town until a store that sells them opened. And so I wandered around some. I stopped in a store that didn't have SIM cards, and I got a snack. I discovered that I didn't have to wait for the cell phone store to open at 10 o'clock. There was a SIM card I could get at the gas station, and so I was away. And given that it's still early in the morning, I got into town at about 6 a.m. I went exploring the Reykjanes Peninsula until the first museum would open at 9. So I looked at lighthouses. Lots of lighthouses. And birds. Some sheep too. Called it a Gallow Cliff, but I'm not sure if any ominous things took place there. Now, the inspiration for taking this trip in the first place was, among other things, Hannah Hefman's podcast, Museums and Strange Places. So that's going to be a theme. Among the things I visited over 2 weeks in Iceland, 30 of them were museums. So we'll start here at Viking World. And here I am in Iceland, checking out a museum. And I'm going to learn something new. It could be anything. What could it be? It's Canada. The main thing being discussed here is the Vikings going to Canada, because the centerpiece of the whole facility is a replica ship that was sailed to Newfoundland a few years back to recognize the anniversary of the journey of Eric the Red. So along the way, the captain met and exchanged gifts with representatives of the indigenous peoples of Greenland, Labrador, and Newfoundland that the Vikings would have met along the way. Here's the ship, Slendingur, sort of suspended up in the middle of the main space. You can look down at the other end, you can see there's a little school group that was there when I was. It's got the classic row of shields along the side. You can get on board and walk around, look out at the water through the window. Lime Coke from the store and went to my next destination. One of the roundabouts had a big sword in the middle. There was a cool looking church. There were lots of those in Iceland. Some interesting things. So the next place I went was the Icelandic Museum of Rock and Roll. And there's a whole big history there, big scene of musicians, festivals, venues, etc. Some pretty cool displays. So this bit's pretty nifty. You like take one of these and you sit it on here, whichever side up is the language. But you spin it, and it progresses through text of the thing like this. I went for lunch and had a nice view. Over there is like a cave for giants to live in, I guess. Building was sufficiently nautical to serve fish and chips. So that airport is out here in Keflavik on this peninsula, and then it was like this part over here was the site of an old U.S. military base, which is part of why there was a rock and roll culture in the area. And so all the exploring so far took place kind of out here. But next I head into town. So the next place I went was Ferland, a natural history museum in a glass dome combined with 6 former geothermal heat tanks and just many of the natural features of Iceland. There was like a cool video of a recent eruption nearby and a little dome theater that showed northern lights. And if I'm being honest, my body was still feeling my 6 a.m. flight out of Regina the previous day. And I can't say I had an easy time staying awake in these parts. It turns out when you're exhausted and you sit in a comfy chair in a dark room, nature takes its course. And I learned about the Arctic in general. And saw an example of one of these sort of bird cliffs that I ended up seeing pretty regularly in the rest of the trip. Now, one of the things they have here, along with ice cream and a zip line, is an indoor ice tunnel. And something they've done a good job of in Iceland is taking cool natural phenomena that they have there and replicating them in Reykjavik for tourists that are content to have it in a controlled setting at the time of their vacation. because to actually visit an ice tunnel, you have to go in the winter, and a lot of the stuff I wanted to see is closed in the winter, and it's dark most of the time. So I think this was preferable. But they showed a bunch of the different phenomena, the clear, glowy ice and the snowpacks and the sort of sedimentary striping. That's where volcanoes would erupt when a glacier was forming, and so the dust stays in that layer of the ice. And there were cool interactives. There was a screen that told you different things depending where you were standing and where you were pointing in the room. And there was a section about water bugs, which is pretty interesting because a lot of the bugs they have there are the same as here. Giant water bugs and water scorpions and back swimmers and whatnot. Another cool feature here is you can go on the roof and look at the view. And so at peak times, they run a zip line down from the roof into the forest. You can look down the city as you ride. And the fact that it was closed didn't bother me because I wouldn't have done it anyway. And you can get a pretty good close view of the dome and out over the city. And I believe Reykjavik means smoke bay. And so presumably that's the bay. It's the Hallgrímskirkja, the big church. It's a major landmark. It's the second tallest building in the country. There's one random office building that just had to be slightly taller out of, you know, it's a cool hill with the fog. And when I was done at Berlin, I went downtown to my hotel. It's a cool place, concrete and moss themed. This little like glass counter with rocks and twigs and things in it. There's plant over my bed. This is the view out onto the street in front. So I went for a walk, and the hotel is basically in a dry dock for ships. And so sometimes you had to look away from this boat because they were actively welding it. I went to Omnom to get some ice cream, and I was surprised that the area I was walking wasn't totally a tourist boardwalk, as much as it was an industrial area that had some touristy things in it. And if you want those chocolate bars, there's actually a place on Main Street here that sells them. But yeah, I kept walking, and there's some heat tanks and industrial spaces. But then all the way down past the loading dock and parking lot of a seafood facility, there's public art. It's called Thufa, and it's visible from in town. This is kind of tough to get to, but it's meant to be sort of a calm, reflective place. You can walk. That angle bit is a path around that you can go up to the top, and the thing at the top is a fish drying shack. And I might have done it, but again, still feeling the flight. I was not in a mood to climb a sketchy hill. And across from the water from there is Harpa, a really cool concert hall that I got to later. Grabbed a lamb wrap on the walk back and went to bed. Didn't really get dark, but it didn't matter. I was super tired. So I slept hard, but I had to get up because I had to be on a bus at 7:30. Because Reykjavik does this slick thing. They have these bus stops near the hotels, and and they run feeder buses. They pick everybody up and then they take them to a central facility where then you get off of the feeder bus and onto the bus that goes to your tour. And so you get onto the appropriate one, and then when you get back, the bus you were on does the circuit and drops you back at the hotel. It's pretty slick. So I rode the bus out into nature, saw the cool moss at speed, so it's blurry. But we were on our way to a meaningful experience at Frinu, which is this particular volcano is cool because while it's been dormant for thousands of years, unlike most dormant volcanoes, it didn't collapse. The magma chambers remained intact and ready to fill with tourists. The bus dropped us off at the sort of main building for the area, but getting to the volcano itself involves a hike from there to a base camp building up the side. And those of us who do not hike regularly appreciated the guides taking stops to tell us fun facts and let us catch up to the fit Germans at the front of the line. They also said if we were lucky, we would have a chance to take in the Icelandic wildlife tour. It's cool to walk through these volcanic landscapes, misty air, checking out the craters and moss, etc. This unceremonious little bridge across a crack is actually fairly significant because it crosses the fault line between the North American plate and the Eurasian plate. So if you ever wanted to say you walked to Europe, this is the way to do it. Eventually, if you walk long enough, you get closer to your destination, this looming volcano ahead. And up here's a little base camp house where you can have a drink and some soup and whatnot, put on harnesses, etc. So got all suited up with my harness and helmet and whatnot, and the last climbing phase. And here's where there would be a really nice view if it weren't so foggy. And get high up enough in a near Arctic place when it's not even quite summer and you'll find some snow. So anyway, this volcano, like I said, it's special. And so at one point after they found it, they decided to go inside and film a documentary. To do this, they had to rig it with a window washing elevator. So it and this catwalk out over the crater are trussed and hung over the hole. The little cart thing comes up. You can ride it down along the walls. You get clipped in and ride safely. And the chamber is irregularly shaped, so the cart has wheels on the side to roll over the walls smoothly rather than crashing and scraping.
The line between the layers here, this was ground level 4,500 years ago. Then this eruption took place and stacked up all the layers above us and formed the crater. Just imagine back then the wall on this side was attached to the wall on this side. But then due to increased pressure inside the magma chamber below us, at some point the ground reaches its limit in terms of strength and just cracks up open. Then you have magma flowing up from here and spitting out from the top. I'm going to stop the lift.
And it's interesting too because there's like a specific line where the wall stops having moss on it because that's where the sun stops coming in. Occasionally bumps around or swings a bit when you're riding, and so it kind of left me putting my feet in for optimal balance and holding tight. I was, still worried every moment I was gonna just like yeet my phone into the cave, but then you're down in the cavern and you can walk around. It's pretty cool. On the walls you see different mineral deposits and places where water went, where lava went, etc. The guide would take a picture of you down there too for proof. And up there is the exit. It would be kind of claustrophobic if you weren't in there in a group with guides. The part where the other half of the group leaves is, I think, the most jarring because the elevator's at the top. It's a big space in there, comfortable temperature. And as I learned, it has cell service just, at the bottom of the cave. So that's, so we ascended back to the base camp, and for whatever reason, they had some gift shoppy stuff at that end. Like they schlepped it up the hill on foot so you could buy it there and then carry it back. I don't know why they wouldn't just sell it in the main building, but I won't question them. When you emerge, you find that the person who stayed in the base camp building has made meat soup for everyone. You're given a general warning you can walk back at your own pace, but the bus home will arrive at a certain time. So I reasoned that I needed an earlier start than some. It's still foggy, but it's starting to thin a little bit. On the way, the guide says, "See that one white bird over there in the distance? That's a ptarmigan. Congratulations! This concludes the wildlife tour of Iceland. It's just that one bird." And more views over moss and distant rock. Easier to keep your own pace on the return trip. Lots of cool remnants from the volcano. Bubbly rocks. There's a better view of the continent crack. And the fog's lifting. Mossy crags, and the moss is really soft and nice. But it takes a really long time to grow, so they're really explicit that you are not supposed to lie on it or walk on it. Yeah, you can really see where the lava flowed. It's all very soft. And yeah, by the time we got back, it was possible to see the distance finally, just as we got to the parking lot. Back to town, the harbor by the hotel. It's time for more museums. And the Maritime Museum talks about water-based industry mostly, fishing and shipping. I like this, clever diagram with all the iconic kinds of fish, like this plastic bottle. And there's this raven here to represent when Hrafna Floki's ravens helped him find Iceland in the first place. And then here was this little display, because from the outside it's a big stack of fish crates, but then inside it's a dedicated space that needed to be kept a bit darker than the rest, so it's good for things made of cloth and that kind of thing. Stalin's can of milk. Next was the Saga Museum, and Saga is actually an Icelandic word meaning history, story, etc. And so there's a series of texts, the sagas, which are narrative histories of the 10th century and are pretty well kept. It also helps that Icelandic is basically Old Norse, mostly unchanged. And so people can just kind of read them now 1,000 years later. And the museum was mostly an audio tour through some sculptural dioramas of the stories. You go through telling you about characters like Wayland the Smith, and here again is Craftsman Floki releasing a raven. Um, these stories inspired a lot of other literature like Beowulf and Lord of the Rings. The next place was the settlement exhibition. Now, this place was pretty cool for a couple of reasons. First of all, it managed to actually be a mostly unproblematic settlement story. Because unlike basically every other settlement story, there wasn't a group of indigenous people already there being harmed and displaced by the exercise. They really did just show up and check out a cool new land. And then the other cool thing about this is that the museum is itself an archaeological site because they dug up this village and just sort of said it was the basement, built a museum building over top. And so it's got these buttons that light up different bits of the settlement so you know what you're reading about. Real bits, and then landscape drawing and text around the outside. And the other floors of the building are from other phases of the development of Reykjavik, and I apparently didn't think any of them were worth remembering. This public artwork commemorates the civil disobedience and demand for improved government following Iceland's financial crisis in 2008. The black cone is like the hats the condemned were made to wear in the Spanish Inquisition, but it cracks the rock. And this is, well, I knew it was a cool looking building when I took a picture of it, but it turns out it's actually the Alþingishúsið, the seat of the Icelandic Parliament. And alas, I did not get a dirty burger at American Bar, which is apparently the main thing you can see from the Icelandic Parliament. What I did do was go get one of the iconic hot dogs with the mustard and remoulade, crispy onions, etc. A good and worthy thing to have done, and this bird agrees. There, the next thing I wanted to do was check out the Icelandic Punk Museum. Anyway, I get there, and a crusty old guy with a mohawk comes to the door and says to go away because he's closing early. So honestly, it's a very punk thing to do, and I can't even be mad. So honestly, I kind of counted even if I didn't technically get inside. So with my punk hopes dashed, I turned to the only one still open and somewhat grudgingly checked out the Phallological Museum. Lots of preserved phalluses and phallus-adjacent products from various creatures, whales and whatnot, mice. There was a donated human one. Some staffs made from bison. And I went to the hippest food court I've ever seen and got some pizza in the ambiance. I had to go through the heavy rains to the parkade. It was time for my journey to begin in earnest. So I checked out, grabbed some breakfast, and set out. So today's journey is to Vestmannaeyjar, which involves getting up maybe not quite as early as yesterday, but still pretty early, so I can check out a few things before my ferry ticket. I stopped in a town to visit a museum that, upon my arrival, I realized was defunct, but there was a cool steam vent and a river view, so I was okay with having stopped to look around. And further along was the Lava Center, which is basically a volcano and earthquake museum. It's a pretty cool immersive space, and had a flag of Iceland. Wow! And in this hallway, they talked about a lot of the major eruptions on record, and a lot of them are from volcanoes that are visible from the lava center. There's one you might have heard of, 2010, the Eyjafjallajökull, and Heimaey in the 70s. That I'll learn more in the afternoon when I go there. And there's some cool interactives, a big spinny thing that advances a projector view, little pads that replicate different types of earthquakes. A big example of the magma plume underneath Iceland. This is a little map at the top. So you just imagine this tower underneath. And the room itself was extra heated for emphasis. And they even had the hallways decked out with content. There was one that had projections and another with a full section that shook like an earthquake. There were projections on regular surfaces. On the roof, you could look at all the distant volcanoes and read which ones were which. That's Eyjafjallajökull. To the left of the frame is Hekla, Búrfell and Björfell. And one more stop on the way to the ferry, Seljalandsfoss. And what ended up being so many cool waterfalls that by the end I got kind of bored of waterfalls and didn't always go out of my way for them. This one was nice and misty and you could go behind if you wanted, but I didn't because I didn't want to dig out my jacket. Then there was another waterfall right nearby. And I got on the ferry and I was on my way to the island. Lots of cool formations. Good views from the boat. It was wavy and I got warm, but not sick ultimately. There to the Sea Life Trust Beluga Whale Sanctuary. This place is an interpretive center for an animal rescue. And they help puffins and whatnot that are hurt. They also manage a range area in the bay for some belugas that were in some sketchy captivity, but aren't in any condition to be back in the wild until they live in sort of a halfway point. And lots of other creatures to see. This eel, fish and crabs, and this guy's having a good time. Next, I went to Eldheimar, one of the ones that sounded so good in the podcast that it made me want to visit. This half of the island erupted in the 70s, and lots of the houses and buildings got trapped in the tephra, which is all the little bits of rock and ash and dust and whatnot. And some are visible outside, like this one. And others had the museum built on top of them. Now, this is a cool piece of tech. It's an audio tour, but the different tracks play automatically when you walk into a specific area over the course of the 2 floors of the museum. And this is one of the houses on this part of the island. It's left how it was, but with the museum built over top. And if you want to get a close look at the debris, they have a live camera that you can sweep over the debris, you can zoom in, etc. It also points out specific objects with further information when you look at them. It's just a bunch of regular houses with the volcano going behind. Another one of the spinny projection change machines. There's a projection on the sand that could kind of tell where the sand was, and it would change the projection a bit when you would dig. was, fun to play with. But it got pretty horrific because between the fires in the houses, and the audio had audio recorded from the eruption. Really good because it wasn't that long ago. Um, and then the upper floor talked about some other things like the emergence of the nearby island Surtsey and the research that's taking place there. It's watching a brand new piece of land start to exist and form an ecosystem. And outside, you could have a look at the part of the island that didn't take volcano damage. And I went to the local folk museum in the upstairs of this library place. I talked about life on the island and some of the historical events that took place there. And there's also a section about there's a music festival that happens there each year, and they all wear these costumes and stuff and have a good time. I went to the grocery store to get some snacks for the drive the next day. I'm getting into the part of the country that's not quite so laden with food. And the logo of the store is silly, so I got some of their bags. And I checked in at stayed at a capsule hotel where I never saw a staff person the whole time I was there. They gave me a door code in the email and said which pod and locker I could take. So I put my stuff in there, took the key, and went for supper. Went up the hill hoping to see some puffins, but the wind and rain were too ridiculous for me to bother. But the ocean views were pretty great. Oh, that's great. The down there in this little pocket is where the belugas live. One can take a little boat over and have a look at them, but I didn't do that. I just, waited to see something white emerge. The low clouds are pretty cool. Scaly wooden church place. Some emergency boats. To this restaurant near there that ended up having reindeer burger. Back to my pod for the night. There was lots of mirror to make it feel a little more spacious than it was. And I watched the only functional channel on the TV and couldn't get audio out the headphone jack. So in service of having anything at all, I watched Eurovision with no sound. And in the morning, I explored the island with the rest of my time. Looked out at the other islands nearby. And saw some sheep, birds, and volcano rocks. Down at the ocean and along the shore. Looked at the rock faces that the puffins would like to be on if there were any. And one of my rare and fleeting moments where I thought maybe one could have fun golfing. until you lose your ball in here. This was also at the golf course. Maybe it's the pro shop. Went back to the lookout point. You definitely see further without the fog. And I did see the blues a couple times. And this island off to the side. View of the town from above. I saw this bathtub on the Google map and I had to check it out. And apparently, a shipwrecked sailor swam to shore here in the winter, I guess, and he didn't die somehow. He was so thirsty. He found this tub and cracked the ice and drank some liquid from inside it before walking across the rocks and finding a house, and then he was saved. So from here it's back to land and further along the bottom. It's a nice day on the way back. Sunny, smooth ride. So I was outside for most of the trip back, looking at the rocks when they weren't so foggy. Lots of neat islands alongside they all sort of have this hunting lodge and nothing else. But you may have talked to some people that make you want to live here. It's also nice to just see the horizon. And the mainland coming back up so I can get back on the road in earnest. Next place was the Skogart Museum. It's in three sort of phases. There's an inside sort of folk tradition space, this historic village, and then a space that's all technology and transportation. There's folk art and boats. And a chaotic wall of every kind of hand tool. It's like, am I even in Iceland or am I just in every rural museum in Saskatchewan? I don't remember if this dog had a special context, but I just feel it needs to be seen. The church and the view from the village. And over here to the third space that kind of reminded me of the Moose Jaw WDM. Iceland's answer to the Bombardier taking the kids to school. Communications tech and construction machines, and most importantly, some pie at the cafe. And then just down the street from the museum, look, another super beautiful waterfall. The lingering mists down the river. Took the sledge and had to find some parking and brace against the wind, but I could look down this beach because so much of the loose sand and whatnot in Iceland is tephra. Most of the beaches are black like this. It's pretty neat. Their view along the cliff. And up here where I was a lighthouse. In the other direction, you could look down on these cool rocks. And there's a sign for the beach below. And over here is where you go if you want to eat food or spend money activating a bathroom turnstile that won't let you in anyway. And over here is where you find the dangerous sneaker waves. I'm a sucker for a cool rock arch. This sign gives you convenient information about how afraid to be of the dangerous sneaker waves. If it's green, you're probably fine, but be careful. Tourists will go swimming. If it's yellow, don't go down onto the beach part and don't turn your back to the water. Tourists listen to the siren saying to take ill-advised beach pictures with the ocean behind them. If it's red, oh God, why are you even down here? Go away. Tourists lay out a blanket and settle in to get claimed by the sea. It was yellow, so I had to look around. I like these basalt column cliffs. one of the ways lava can cool makes these interesting like hexagon columns. You aren't kidding about the bigness of the waves down here, though. You can allow yourself to be claimed by Neurovert if that's what you're into. Then I drove down one of the potholiest roads I've ever been down, and as you know, that's saying something. To go something that I had labeled on my map and forgotten why, but didn't want to spend the data on being reminded, so I just sort of went for it down the sketchy road, waited for the influencer couple to be done. And, it was caved in the rocks that looked like Yoda, so I don't know, I regret. We're going to be looking to see these majestic mountain views, this exciting glacier so close at hand. Window of the hotel room, not bad. And sat down in the hotel restaurant and had ordered a drink and stuff, gotten a little too committed to back out before I saw the menu and the price of a pork tenderloin in one of the comparatively more rural stretches of an already remote island. So I paid a fair amount more for this than I was comfortable with for fear of imposing, but whatever, it was delicious. So next was to continue the rest of the way along the bottom. I'd booked a boat tour in a glacier lagoon for a little later than it would take for me to get up and drive to it. So I thought I'd hit a different glacier lagoon along the way. As we all know, you can't trust the weather until after Victoria Day, and so it snowed. I pressed on along the progressively more difficult to recognize dirt road until I got to what may have been a shallow puddle, but may not have been. And I'm not trying to lose a rental car in a sinkhole and miss my boat ride, so I turned around. Got to Elko Asylum, put on my jacket, and had a look at what was visible from the parking lot. Pretty cool. Like I mentioned before, the black and gray stuff is tephra from when the glacier ice at that level was hit by a volcano. As you know, these are just the little bits at the top while the water and therefore the ice under it is deep. We got into one of these amphibious vehicles, suited up and drove down the road before splashing into the water. And they showed us one of the nice clear ice chunks up close. It's a little too brisk for most people to feel encouraged to hold it. Yeah, we spun it around and had a good look. And it's pretty neat to see because some of them have this nice distinct breakage point where not too long ago they calved. The icebergs broke off of the glacier where it sticks out over the lagoon. And some have been floating around for a while and eroded in the air of the water. And in around here, there were seals to be found. They like this area because fish will go in there, but big scary predators don't make the trip up the stream. I didn't get a good view because not getting good views of seals is kind of a theme of this trip. And the blue ones are the result of snow falling on the glacier and the weight of it squishing the air bubbles out. White ones have more air in them, and the black and gray striped ones are, say, is tephra. There's also some of the really smooth, clear stuff. And when they're ready, the icebergs float down this river under the bridge and out to sea. Ducks are there to see them off. And the smaller bits and chunks that fall off on the way will wash up on the beach at the exit from the lagoon. It's the name Diamond Beach. Here the waves washing them in and disguising yet another seal. It's definitely there, but you can't see it in the picture. The water is always falling. Cliffs. this glacier section doesn't end in the lagoon. It just sort of stops over a farmer's field. Yeah, rock formations with Zephyr on top, another cool foggy mountain, and seemingly an ad for the vehicle itself. This waterfall is a little more intentionally adapted, maybe to make the upcoming road a little safer. Then a lighthouse and a public artwork that is a series of polished rock eggs. Here from the eggs. Here in all his distant and tiny glory is the one time a seal I saw actually translated into an image. Um, and, the hotel in that was kind of like a cabin, had tasty foods. It's definitely a fishing village with not a whole lot happening, but I took the opportunity to explore what it did have, which includes this neat old boat and a shrimp. That's in Nova Scotia. It's unrelated. Yeah, boat and yeah, mountain and water. We are continued down the east and up back the other way, including the easternmost thing I've ever done. Go to Petra Stone Collection. This is an interesting place because it's not so much a museum in the traditional sense, but a keeping house for someone's personal collection. And Petra herself has died, but the collection is maintained by her children in her house and yard. It's not particularly labeled, it's just sort of laid out in the yard, surrounded by yard things. It's a pretty big setup. Runs up the hill quite a ways. There's some other decorative stuff. Some of it's ponds and steps and along a lot of these long wooden surfaces. Of course, it didn't stop with rocks. Petra also collected other things like cards, matchbooks, eggs, the pens that are given away free at hotels and whatever. The inside the house are more display cases, some of the smaller and more precious stuff, as well as some taxidermy, etc. Shells of geodes and so on. I don't know that I learned much about rocks, but I was impressed by the setup nonetheless. East Iceland Heritage Museum. Lots of historic tools, replica spaces from old houses in the area, traditional decoration like tapestry, a house in the middle with a bed. There's a temporary show about reindeer because there are some wild reindeer in the east now, but they're introduced. Initially, the only mammals in Iceland were Arctic foxes, but some farmed reindeer came, and as it happened, some got loose. And they lived in a landscape that was as good for them as it was in Norway, so they're doing all right. Yeah, even just the standard little town parks around here are nice. The road bridge, look down the river. More scenic view stops along the highway. General area around Lake Mývatn. Lots of geothermal steam and whatnot. So lots of it gets harnessed. Interesting sidebar. I don't think I have a picture of because the water just comes out of the ground hot. They can use it for a lot of things we don't have because it would be wasteful. And so hotels have these like heated towel racks and stuff because you can just feed hot water from the ground through it up and back down, and it's sort of a cycle. So you can keep the towel warm. Yeah, the hills is meat crater. This was Krafna. And down was the Fetish geothermal area, which is neat. Looks like another planet. Pools of actively boiling water. Interesting colors of mud. Bowls and big expanses. Because of all these little steam pits and things, it stinks. Whole area is a little sulfury, but this is aggressive with the brimstone. But it looks cool. And they had these fumaroles, which are steam vents, constantly releasing gases from the ground. The magma is pretty close to the surface in this area, so the ground can be warm to the touch. And you also need to stick to paths on hikes in the area because there are places you can walk that would melt your shoes. And the big steamy ponds, distant views of mountains, piles of tephra. I went to this neat little cave, not pictured the busload of German tourists that came at the same time as me. If you've both seen and not totally scrubbed Game of Thrones from your mind, you might remember Jon Snow having a scene in this cave. Because the water down there is warm, it's steaming. But another thing to do is throw a pebble in there to hear the sounds in the cave. Yeah, people used to swim there, but it's not recommended from a natural landscape standpoint. But also, there was an eruption in the 70s that made it so that the water there is now too hot. It used to be comfortable, now it's a little dangerous. But you can see the temptation to hang out down there. And on the top of the cave is a long sort of fissure thing. It's pretty cool. Not too difficult of a climb up from the cave entrance, and the entrance is right at the parking lot. So yeah, classic Iceland. The roads go directly to the tourism. And yeah, another room with a view of the mountain across the lake. I had to do it. The notion was never super enticing, but there would be too many aghast reactions if I went to Iceland and didn't go to a hot spring. So that's what I did. I didn't go to the expensive one down south, but I got the experience anyway. Went and sat in the warms and tried to ignore the sulfury smell. Already sulfury water through the dirt nearby to clean it, but also for minerals and just sort of a certain kind of greasy smoothness that people love. Is good for their skin and that kind of thing. And yeah, it was warm and mostly comfortable, and there was a nice view and relative solitude if you were willing to get out and climb the stairs through the wind to go from the section with the swim up bar to the section that looked out. There were some spray things, kind of a shower head type deal. They gone for the experience. Different parts of the pool vary in heat, and they're very explicit at a government level about just how clean you need to get prior to going in the water. So it's not super gross in there. Neither one feels particularly clean when one smells like sulfur. 'Cause even the shower and the regular tap water was sulfury, so there wasn't much escaping it. Over here, I guess where the water comes in, is it's much hotter than recommended. But yeah, it's generally a nice place, and I try my best to relax in there. And I think I'm going to stop there for today. I'm about halfway, but I'm all the way through the time. So thanks everybody for coming. Any questions?
What is their main livelihood? Is it just fishing or what is it?
There's some fishing and aluminum mining, and then a lot of tourism at this point. They're particularly after they had a big financial crisis not too long ago, and they've really leaned into the tourism. But it's yeah, I mean it's tricky because you're in the middle of the ocean in a country with the population of the combination of Regina and Saskatoon. You're trying to make it go, but it's so a lot of things were expensive, but it was nice.
So you were not an organized tour for the most part, you go yourself and then just join like side tours.
Yeah, there were a few things that I joined up for. The volcano was a tour, and the Glacier Lagoon boat was a tour. But yeah, most things I just sort of decided where I wanted to go, and I went there. Yeah, it's good fun.
I think Iceland is made out of volcanic eruptions, right?
Oh yeah,
The whole lava.
yeah. Well, it's still and they talk about tourist eruptions, certain ones where it's like the lava is coming out and it's visible and it's flowy and it's not super dangerous by comparison. And um, so I got a few months after I was back, there was an eruption, and I got an email from Iceland Air saying, "Here's the deal: if you want to come back and see this eruption, it's not always the safest way to go." And well, let's talk about it in the second half talk in the spring. But one of the things they've got is a show where they have lava flowing down a trough, and they do some things and show you how it works, so you can get a up close experience of what it's like without having to go somewhere dangerous or relying on a volcano being erupting at the time. Because, as I say, they've taken matters into their own hands for tourism, and so they're keeping. So they put what they can into a controlled experience in the city that they could do, and they've got their own airlines. You can make an arrangement to extend a layover, like you can fly there from North America and then change planes to wherever you want to go in Europe. Or you can say, well, I'd like to add a couple days in Iceland while I'm on the way, and so they do that, and then they take in all of the condensed tourism in the city and brings in some money.